Welcome, everyone, to Network 2020's briefing on what to expect from the post-Merkel Germany. It is a pleasure to have you all here today, as well as our panelists. My name is Courtney Dogger, and I'm the president of Network 2020. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, Network 2020 is an inclusive international community. We're based in New York, and we're really focused on bridging the gap between the private sector and the foreign policy world. So we run a number of programs, including this virtual briefing series, where we bring leading experts to talk about developments in the world to our global audience. We also run a number of other programs, so please do feel free to check out our website to learn more about some of the research that we do and some of the other programs that we do as well. We are very lucky to be joined today by several panelists. I'll just introduce them briefly. We have Erik Brattberg, who is the director of the Europe program and fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington. We also have Naz Masraff, who is the Eurasia Group's, she directs the Eurasia Group's analysis of Germany, Turkey, and emerging European markets. And lastly, but not least, we have Bill Drozdiak, who is the former foreign editor of the Washington Post. And he has also written a book called Fractured Continent, Europe's Crises and the Fate of the West. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you. We are also very fortunate to have Joanna Waszczewski moderating today. She is a senior program advisor at Network 2020 and has held a number of policy positions and has worked in nonprofits as well. So thank you all for being here today. I am now going to turn it over to Joanna, and we look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. So the German elections this past September were historic in several ways, including that there would be a new chancellor for the first time in 16 years, and that there was the likelihood of a multi-party coalition rather than the traditional two-party arrangements seen in the past. So what will a post-Angela Merkel Germany look like, and what impact will it have on the European Union, the United States, and NATO? What lessons can be drawn from the Merkel era, and can they provide any guidance for Germany's policies in the future? I look forward to discussing these various issues with the panelists today. So let me start first with you, Naz. The German elections were held on September 26th. Could you let us know where things stand currently?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Anna, and thanks for having me today. When we were first kind of talking about organizing this panel, I guess we were all a bit more pessimistic about the prospects of parties coming together and making this much progress. In our mind is always the kind of example of 2017, where it took almost 6 months for the parties to agree on a grand coalition after the so-called kind of three-party Jamaica coalition talks failed. But now it looks like Social Democrats, led by their Chancellor candidate Olaf Scholz, and the kind of business-friendly Free Democrats and the Greens have made quite significant progress in exploratory talks. So on Friday, they had a joint declaration, a paper, where they have made, managed to close the gaps on many of the difficult policy areas, and they have decided to move on to more kind of formal coalition talks, and now a lot more kind of technical talks will take place alongside kind of more senior level discussions, and a lot more detail about the actual coalition agreement will be discussed. So, in Eurasia Group, where I'm working at, we like making kind of putting odds to events, but basically our view right now is that there's an 85% chance the so-called traffic light coalition, derived from the colors of these parties, the red, green, and yellow, is likely to come together. And it's not going to take 6 months or anything like that. Most likely late November, or I would say kind of worst case early December, we'll have a German government in place, probably in time for Olaf Scholz to take part in the December EU summit as Germany's new chancellor. The other kind of alternatives still are on the cards. So we assign kind of 10% chance to, again, a Jamaica, so-called Jamaica coalition, which would be led by the center-right. But I would say the chances of that is quite slim, and that's especially to do with the kind of uncertainty and the turmoil that's been kind of, center-right has been experiencing after their pretty bad result under their Chancellor candidate Armin Laschet in September elections. He has decided to step down as the party leader. There'll be a new election. There's a lot of kind of question marks as to even how they're going to go through that election, whether it's going to be through the membership vote or their formal process is actually through their party delegates. They're going to make a decision on this in November. Most likely the leadership change will take place early in 2022. So, with a lame duck leader at the helm of CDU, it's very difficult to foresee the Greens or the FDP agreeing to build a coalition with the center right. That looks very, very difficult. And the only remaining option is another grand coalition, this time led by the SPD. Again, I would assign a very limited kind of 5% chance or so on this, but we know last time there were kind of similar talks in 2017, and then they failed, and Grand Coalition ended up being the kind of fallback option. So it's kind of probably it would be cautious to not rule this option out, but I think we're kind of heading to swifter than expected German government coming together.
Thank you for that. I just wonder, what do these various parties, what do they agree upon and what do they disagree upon so far?
So I think the most difficult two issues have been climate policy and fiscal policy. On the kind of fiscal side, the Social Democrats and the Greens have more in agreement in terms of kind of social spending, in terms of kind of what they want to do regarding investment. A lot bigger role for public investments. The Free Democrats are kind of against all kinds of tax increases. So what they're kind of managing to agree on is that, as long as the overall tax burden doesn't increase, I think they can kind of, as long as they don't introduce a wealth tax, FDP's red lines will be served, so they're kind of willing to agree. And the bigger question is always around the kind of the German sensitivity around this taking on new debt and the so-called debt brake, which would limit the country's annual net borrowing by 0.35% of GDP. So, changing this is a constitutionally enshrined principle. Ideally, Greens would like to change this because they would like to make 500 billion euros of investments over the next decade. But, FDP is very certain that this is the red line. So that's not going to change. But I think they're looking for ways to, in a way, circumvent the debt brake through various other mechanisms like an investment fund that's geared towards climate or infrastructure or digital investments or kind of other mechanisms of potentially transferring some of the funds that were earmarked for 2022 to 2023 so that can finance some investments. But they're certainly kind of coming together on a lot of the positions. Obviously, foreign policy, I'm sure my kind of fellow panelists will discuss, has been less of an issue during the election campaign, but there's also quite kind of divergences on those policies as well. But it seems like, there's a way out.
All right. Thank you. And now if I can turn to you, Bill, looking into your crystal ball about post-Merkel era, what trends are you seeing in the Transatlantic alliance and what role is Germany likely to play?
Well, I think longer term, the quest for greater self-reliance in Europe for its security and defense policy is going to become more and more pronounced. Emmanuel Macron, if he is reelected early next year, says he wants to make that the focus of the EU priorities over the next 5 to 10 years. because I think he is gaining ground with his conviction that longer term, it's unhealthy for the transatlantic partnership for Europe to be in such a subservient role of dependency on the American security umbrella. And I think efforts by Europe to take more responsibility for its own security and defense will be welcomed in the United States. Until now, it has been seen as a source of consternation because it might undermine American leadership of NATO. But I think the recent fracas over AUKUS, the Australian submarine deal, showed that, and how Biden and Macron tried to reconcile their differences on this with a statement that said, we welcome European efforts to take greater control of their own security, provided that it's done in complementarity with NATO. So I think if they can stick to that perspective, and we'll know more after they meet at the end of this month on the sidelines of the G20. But I think that will be an important focus. But more immediately for a new government in Germany, I think, and for other governments in Europe, the prospect of a major energy crisis this winter is going to be the focus of whatever the government wants to make as its agenda. Certainly, the Nord Stream 2 deal is still looked on with great alarm by some Eastern countries and the Baltic states as greater dependency or being excluded by a deal between Russia and Germany. And the shortages that Europe is suffering through right now are attributed in some respects to manipulation of the market by Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. So I think those are the short and longer term challenges facing the next government.
And do you think, Bill, with Britain no longer in the EU and Macron up for re-election after the new year in the spring, do you think that there will be, I don't want to use the word as kind of strong challenge, but do you think another European leader might want to step into the role that Merkel had traditionally played?
Well, I think Macron, ever since his election in 2017, has aspired to a partnership with the German leader. Certainly on the first day of, right after his inauguration, he flew to Berlin and tried to seal a partnership with Merkel. But as I outlined in my book, The Last President of Europe, which describes my conversations with Macron and his view of the world and the future of Europe, he was extremely disappointed in Merkel's very cautious approach, taking one step forward and then looking around and not being really ready to leap ahead with a visionary step toward a more politically integrated Europe. And he was hoping that he could emulate the example of Helmut Kohl and Francois Mitterrand, who made substantial progress, particularly in constructing the Eurozone. But he didn't find that partner in Angela Merkel. And I think that's a reflection of Merkel's, and one of the big shortcomings of her time in power was that she was not able to move Europe forward. I think Chancellor Scholz could be proved to be different. I think he does have stronger convictions about Europe, and I believe that certainly Macron has great hopes in a partnership with him.
All right, thank you. And now, Erik, if I can turn to you and ask, what do you believe has been the greatest legacy of the Merkel era, especially for transatlantic relations and NATO?
Sure. I mean, I think Merkel's legacy has been very positive, but I think it's also been mixed. And kind of what I mean with that is, of course, Merkel at her core is a committed transatlanticist. That's her outlook on the world. But more recently, that's been rocked, especially with her painful experience under President Trump. I mean, let's remember, Angela Merkel became chancellor in 2005 at a low point of US-German relations after the Iraq War under Gerhard Schröder, brother who was not very keen on this relationship, and she really rebuilt it. She invested in her relationship with Washington, developed strong ties with then President Bush and later President Obama. And I think there was a great appreciation, and has been throughout her 16 years in office, from Washington for her ability to kind of keep Europe together during difficult times, manage crises, handle serious issues that Europe has faced, whether it's the Eurozone crisis, whether it's the Crimea crisis and dealing with Ukraine and dealing with the relationship with Russia, continuing to be an advocate for enlargement, which wasn't always the case for Germany when it comes to bringing in countries in the East and the Western Balkans. So I think there's certainly a strong track record here in terms of her engagement at the transatlantic level. At the same time, I think there's also criticism, and some of that criticism from Washington, I think, is valid. There's been a longstanding U.S. concern with the lack of German defense spending and sort of free riding on military issues. That's something that President Obama was warning about. It's something that Trump made a big issue, of course, during his time in the White House. Bill mentioned Nord Stream 2, this pipeline deal with Russia, while continuing to push for sanctions against Russia over Ukraine, also cutting a gas deal with Putin that really alienates NATO's allies in the East. And then I think more recently, the whole issue of dealing with China, which we can maybe come back to later. I think that's another area where Merkel is increasingly at kind of opposite ends with where the debate in Washington, and in many ways also, frankly, where the debate on Europe is, how to deal with China as a systemic rival or challenge. So I think it sort of is a bit of a mixed experience. And I think what I would also just highlight, I think, is that for Merkel herself, I think she has, during these 16 years in office, kind of evolved from being sort of starry-eyed and looking at the United States as a source of inspiration to increasingly, I think, seeing the United States with more skeptical eyes. And to Bill's point, wanting to see Europe stand more on its own 2 feet, take more responsibility, be less dependent on the United States, while at the same time not necessarily following Macron in terms of his vision of a Europe that's really sort of more independent. She is still a committed transatlanticist, but I think one that is far more sort of realistic and far more pessimistic about the U.S. role in the world and U.S. leadership and U.S. domestic problems. So I think this is going to be a really key challenge for the next German government, is how to really, I think, design, a vision for a stronger, more capable, more sovereign Europe that's still anchored in the transatlantic alliance, and a vision that can actually bring together member states. I think Macron has had a lot of ideas, but they've been quite divisive, and a lot of member states are still quite skeptical. And I think the onus is on Berlin to kind of try to cobble together these different visions in a way that can actually bring European countries together in a way, frankly, that Washington and the Biden administration should be supportive of. So it's a mixed legacy, and there's a lot of more work that the new government will have to do.
And that's my next question is the potential coalition. What do they agree on regarding foreign policy, and what are some major differences?
Sure. I think Naz kind of brought this up. Foreign policy was not a big issue in the German election. In the statement that she referenced, foreign policy, there were some parts that dealt with foreign policy. I would say that there is, broadly speaking, a lot of agreement between the three parties in terms of kind of overall the foreign policy outlook of sort of emphasizing the need for a stronger, more sovereign Europe, emphasizing the need to keep the transatlantic alliance together. What I thought was interesting in the position paper was there was some more references to democracy and sort of dealing with authoritarian countries like Russia and China. This, I think, would mark sort of a point of departure from the sort of Merkel status quo approach, which hasn't really emphasized the values dimension very much. It's really emphasized more kind of economic and trade ties when it comes to dealing with China and dealing with Russia. So I think that was interesting. But there's still, even if there is broad agreement, that even if I think Scholz is sort of a mainstream player within German foreign policy thinking, even though he hasn't had a whole lot of foreign policy experience, but he's dealt with issues related to trade, international financial issues in his role as mayor of Hamburg and in his role as finance minister. I think there's potential for FDP and for the Greens to be a significant voice here, especially if they end up getting the foreign minister position, to, I think, rhetorically maybe, make Germany a bit more aligned with the debates in Europe and in Washington, especially on global issues like China, and move away from the status quo. But there's still some disagreements here that I think still needs to be fleshed out. The Greens, are not particularly keen on nuclear issues. That's going to be a big issue that NATO will have to decide on. They're not very keen on necessarily military interventions like what France wants to do in the Sahel and the reflections of the Afghanistan experience for NATO. And I think defense spending will continue to be an issue where some parties are maybe going to continue to resist major investments there. So I think there's broad alignment. I think there's an expectations that what Germany needs is strategic thinking on its own, and moving away from a little bit what Bill talked about, this kind of sense of status quo that we've had under Angela Merkel. But of course, she will fill a big void, and her stature in Europe is unparalleled. And Scholz, while being the chancellor, presumably, if that ends up being the case, will have a hard time match the kind of influence that she has had. And what I'm also looking for at the European level, and that will be my final point, is whether he will continue to seek to play the role of kind of uniting member states and bringing countries together and cobble out, compromises on critical issues, including on foreign policy. So I think that's certainly something to look for if Berlin will continue to play that role, which I expect at the European level as well.
Thank you very much, which leads to my question to Naz next is, the German Chancellor has traditionally played a leading economic role within the EU. So what impact will the new coalition have on EU fiscal policy, towards Brexit and rule of law issues, which have really come to the fore, specifically regarding Poland and Hungary?
Yeah, again, in all these areas, I think the Merkel legacy is a bit mixed, but I'll go over, I'll start with kind of the fiscal policy. I mean, this is a significant challenge the new Chancellor will have to confront, because obviously EU member states are going back to Stability and Growth Pact in 2023. And next year, they kind of have to decide, how and, if they're going to revise some of these rules. The fiscal review is starting actually tomorrow. And it's very much going to kind of progress in parallel to the domestic fiscal debate in Germany in the kind of during coalition negotiations and what position SPD, FDP and the Greens take. I mean, Scholz is a pragmatist. He's not a kind of huge fiscal hawk. At the same time, he's not as left-leaning as his party's leadership. So I don't think he is inclined to kind of open the Pandora's box of start preemptively proposing, changing EU's fiscal architecture. I think his long-held view has been that, the Stability and Growth Pact has proven to be flexible enough. So I think the outcome is going to be somewhere kind of something similar to what you will see inside Germany. So you stick to the rules, but you come up with some kind of creative methods to go around them. Either that's kind of temporary suspension of the rules if and when needed, or certain investment rules that take into account kind of climate or sustainability investments, or specific transformation funds to finance them. And this is more, even more the kind of case because we expect FDP chief Christian Lindner to take on the finance ministry role. So I think he's going to really insist on not going too far on making the kind of EU's fiscal rules too flexible. And when you look back on kind of the text that was agreed on Friday, there's absolutely no mention of common European debt or Eurobonds, anything like that. This is very much the FDP red line. On Brexit, I think that's probably a challenge the Chancellor will face, but it's been very much ignored both during the election campaign, but also in terms of kind of Germany's own preparation for or EU's own preparation for this. Tensions between EU and the UK has been increasing, steadily. Most recently, the EU responded to the UK's demands to rewrite the Northern Ireland Protocol. which is kind of to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland. And the proposal actually went a bit further than what the UK expected in terms of kind of flexibility for movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. But the EU did not offer any concessions on the role of kind of the mandate of European Court of Justice in policing the protocol. And this is absolutely a no-go for UK. You know, there's, you know, the UK is going to insist on this. EU has little appetite to concede on it. So we are actually heading to a much kind of bigger political standoff. Potentially UK might, you know, trigger Article 16 of the protocol, escalating the standoff. And Scholz has said very little about this. And you know, even though there's no kind of automaticity and there would be kind of obviously negotiations between the two sides, this really increases the risk of a trade war between kind of EU and the UK, and I think that's something that's been ignored. And maybe finally a few words on rule of law issues and what's been going on with Poland and Hungary and whether the German position changes. I think it will change. I think there's a sense in Germany and the rest of EU that, you know, Merkel in a way let this issue get out of hand, and there's a sense that, you know, Germany needs to course correct, and I think that Berlin's stance on Poland and Hungary is likely to harden, partly to do with, you know, the Greens have a lot more kind of, I'd say, principled stance on foreign policy, and FDP is supportive of that too, but also just purely by the fact that there's a sense that both Hungary but also Poland have crossed kind of new red lines. You know, in the case of Hungary, it was, you know, LGBTQ rights, and in Poland, there has been a recent case, again, steady worsening of rule of law, but also a recent constitutional court ruling that pretty much questioned the supremacy of EU law over national law. So, you know, the EU now feels they have to, you know, enough is enough, and Commission is keen to do something, especially in the context of these two countries about to receive, you know, hefty chunks of EU recovery fund money. In the case of Poland, it's 36 billion euros. For Hungary, it's 7.2 billion. So there's leverage that EU can use, and you know, member states and European Parliament is putting pressure on the Commission. So I think that the disbursement of these funds, at least the first tranche, is going to be delayed. I think a very kind of dirty compromise between the EU and you know, Commission and these countries is unlikely, which seemed to be the case in the past. That happened a few times. And I think the EU is looking into triggering this rule of law conditionality, the new mechanism that they've adopted last December, to basically make any kind of additional funding conditional on countries abiding by EU's kind of norms and rules. So the risk here as well, kind of Merkel always managed to keep EU united, delicately handling Hungary and Poland, you know, with some cost. A weaker chancellery in Germany, Scholz, might struggle to navigate a fine line around this. So I think that's going to be definitely another challenge.
Yeah, it's quite a few challenges ahead for the likely new coalition. Now, Bill, if I can turn to you about what you foresee likely relations between the new chancellor and President Biden, given there have been a lot of difficulties in the past year between Germany and the United States, with Nord Stream 2, with Angela Merkel's approach toward China. What do you see are the greatest bilateral issues of importance or concern?
Well, I think given Germany's strength as a leading trade power, it'll be matters of protectionism, because the Biden administration has continued with tariffs and the protectionist policies that were pursued by Donald Trump in a way that troubles the Europeans. And then there's also the question of regulating big tech, a major bone of contention between Europe and the United States. But just to move on to the larger issue of China, I think that could be a real challenging factor in European-American relations, but also specifically between Chancellor Scholz and President Biden. From what I gather from my friends in the SPD, that Scholz realizes that Merkel was far too tolerant of China's abuses of human rights and following the mercantilist policies of economic nationalism just to further trade at any cost with China. Now, the automobile lobby in Germany is extremely powerful, and any chancellor has to pay close attention to it. But I think this is where Scholz has a unique alliance with the Greens, in the sense that he would like to challenge them on human rights, and I think we'll see a much tougher attitude by the German chancellor toward China. But on the other hand, they do not want to blindly follow the United States on a path of aggressive competition that could lead to armed confrontation with China. And I think I would tell people to keep their eyes on this issue, because in Europe you have to look at the recent history. The Bush administration disregarded the warnings of France and Germany about the dangers of invading Iraq, and we all saw how that played out. The Europeans who participated in ISAF, the NATO efforts in Afghanistan, were blindsided by the Biden administration. And now there's a palpable fear in Europe that the Biden administration is lurching toward a potential armed confrontation with China, which could erupt at any time over Taiwan. Europe doesn't have any security agreements with Taiwan, and if they are faced with a fait accompli, the United States has gone into an armed conflict with China over Taiwan, and the United States says, "Come on, we're counting on you to support us." I think there will be a lot of anxiety in Europe about once again following the United States into a misbegotten armed conflict with China over a territory that all of them agree, for better or worse, belongs to China, but and they don't have any security arrangements with Taiwan. So this is something that could really blow up the transatlantic relationship if it's not handled properly.
Thank you. And now, Erik, I know you've done some work on this, looking at Germany's relationship with China. Would you like to add something?
Sure. No, I think Bill is absolutely right. I would just point out that I think, Merkel has had a lot of experience, 16 years in dealing with China. I think she, I think it's worth recalling initially that she was actually viewed as being tougher on China than her predecessor, Schröder. She pledged to focus more on human rights. She met with, Dalai Lama. But then I think during the financial crisis, she increasingly looked to China as a source of, both inbound investments, but especially exports to China. And I think, as Bill mentioned, that has been kind of her outlook ever since, this kind of geo-economic Germany first approach. I would argue that there are 5 sort of elements shaping her approach, or that has shaped her approach towards China so far. The first one is this notion of favoring carrots over stick, avoiding confrontation, avoiding being overtly assertive towards China, in part for fear of Chinese economic retaliation that we've seen against other countries in Europe and elsewhere, such as Australia in recent years. Number 2 is pro-engagement. She's really been the European leader that has led the sort of pro-engagement camp when it comes to dealing with China that we saw recently over the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investments, that she very much pushed for as a way to get China to sort of sign up to and play by the rules. She believes in multilateralism as I think a matter of principle, actually, that you should engage your adversaries, and it can have a transformative effect. The third piece is, I think, this notion that she has been also more vocal in recent years on shoring up German and European economic self-defense. This includes, pushing for more FDI screening at home, but also being more open to industrial policy at a European level, something that is, not very German, but she has warmed a bit to that idea, including working with Macron, and certainly something that Scholz has also worked with his French counterpart on industrial policy and kind of looking at competition policy and how to strengthen European giants to compete better with China and with the US. The fourth piece quickly is, I think she has tried to play a role similar to on other issues such as Russia on trying to maintain European unity on dealing with China. Although she has been accused of pursuing a unilateral approach, such as when dealing with the CEI, I think she has sought to bring Europe together. She tried to do that during the German EU presidency, trying to hold a summit in Leipzig, bringing all the 27 European leaders together to meet with Xi. That did not happen, it fell apart, but nevertheless, I think it shows her efforts there. And I think she's also legitimately concerned about Chinese influence in Europe, especially in Central Eastern Europe as part of the 17+1 platform and in areas like the Western Balkans. And then the fifth piece, which Bill already touched on, I think is important to just highlight, is she is careful. She's trying to keep the US at an arm's length when it comes to dealing with China. I think there's a sense that there are shared interests between the US and China, at least on economic and trade issues. But she is not interested in taking part of what is increasingly seen in Europe and in Berlin as kind of a zero-sum, ideological competition between the US and China. What I think that means, however, is that Merkel is increasingly out of touch with the debate on China in Germany and in Europe and certainly in the United States at a time when major, players in her own party, like Röttgen, for instance, in her own party was one of the candidates to become her successor. But also, Greens like Brattberg and others increasingly calling at least for a more vocal German approach towards pushing back against Chinese, human rights and democracy violations. So I think that's an area where I see the debate is shifting away from the kind of status quo that we've had. I don't think it's going to lead to a sea change. I do think Germany will continue to promote its own interests, its own economic interests when dealing with China. But I do think, at least in terms of some of the nuances, I expect a bit of change as we get a new government.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so let me turn to them now. And the first one is, what is the best approach to handle the relationship between Germany and Russia? What are the major issues with Russia for the new chancellor? So who would like to take a stab at that?
Well, I'll just say briefly, I think within the SPD, there is a significant faction of what is called Putin-Versteher, Putin whisperers, who would like to see, and epitomized by former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, who is now the chairman of Gazprom, so that Scholz will feel pressure within his own party to take a more conciliatory approach to Vladimir Putin, despite all of his transgressions in Ukraine and Georgia and elsewhere. And we'll see how that goes. But as I mentioned at the outset, the potential of a major energy crisis, which could drive natural gas prices through the roof at a time when Europe is still struggling with the post-pandemic economic pressures, could really become a defining moment in the relationship between Russia, Germany, and Europe.
If I can add just quickly, totally agree with what Bill has said, but also there's a sense that Merkel managed this relationship in a totally kind of bilateral, but also kind of tactical way. And there's a sense that, with these like key relationships, you have to go through kind of a more European approach. So I think this will require Berlin to, convince Paris that the heavyweights alone shouldn't kind of manage ties with Moscow alone, instead going for a, bigger kind of EU 27, maybe EU 27+1 type of approach, getting kind of, smaller EU member states also on board as well. That's probably the move we're going to see, and a change from Merkel era as well, slowly.
And if I could just add one piece, I think one thing that I would also look at that could be interesting to see is, again, with the Greens taking part of the government, presumably maybe getting the foreign minister role, will we see kind of a more outspoken German approach towards Russia, especially on sort of human rights issues, where Merkel, to her credit, has dealt with Navalny and other issues quite well. But I think there is a push to also have Germany kind of be a bit more outspoken and I think frame this issue as really a kind of a competition between democracies and authoritarian countries, the way that very much the debate is framed in Washington these days. And I think the Greens are more aligned in that sense than Merkel has been so far. So we could potentially see at least a rhetorical change in how Germany positions itself, both vis-a-vis Russia and vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, and if I could add just one point to what Erik said, the Greens were strongly opposed to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So I don't know whether that's going to affect whether it actually becomes functional or not. But that's a reflection of their deep antagonism toward the Putin regime.
All right, thank you. Now, this next question I think will be for you, Naz. Following 16 years of prosperity, it is often said that Germany is now reaching the end of an economic cycle. Is the German economy well prepared for the future?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think in a way, Germany has been left without kind of the necessary investments for a very long time. So there's really the sense that the kind of export dependency and in a way kind of China dependency is a vulnerability, and that was the sense even before the pandemic. And you would get that sense from the business groups as well, and you see this change within FDP and within CDU that you need to kind of balance things, and I think there's a big demand from German businesses that domestic investments need to be a driver and engine for growth, and Germany has also been kind of quite behind on digitization, and a lot of kind of investments need to go in that sphere as well. Again, the kind of supply issues, supply chain bottlenecks is certainly will continue to be an issue for the industry, but that's probably quite kind of widespread anyways, but hurts Germany, which is a lot more dependent on exports, and I would say the type of kind of reforms that you saw under Schröder, then 16 years of Merkel rule, there was a real kind of pause in reform. So I think in terms of the kind of next era, we'll have to see a lot more for Germany to kind of catch up in that sense and go back to regain its competitiveness again in that sense. All
right, thank you. And now a question for you, Erik. It's on the Eastern Mediterranean. And the participant is asking, as comment is becoming more critical to Europeans over time, and will Germany-Turkish relations remain status quo, or will they develop and change?
Interesting. I mean, I think, what Merkel has tried to do is to try to maintain somewhat decent relations with Turkey at a very difficult time, especially at a time when we're seeing Turkish relations with the West, and in particular with France, really deteriorating quite considerably. And we've also seen France recently entering into a new bilateral security defense partnership with Greece in a way that could really cause tensions within the NATO alliance, where both Turkey and France are members. So I think Germany's role here is to try to maintain this relationship, try to find ways of maybe using its leverage on economic and trade issues, prospects of customs union and so forth, and trying to find a way of maintaining relations with Ankara. But of course, I mean, the deterioration of the domestic political situation in Turkey is a major concern, especially as if we move towards this more values-driven German foreign policy approach that we've just been discussing. I could see that being an area that would, of course, lead to tremendous tensions between the two countries. So I think I would suggest that there would be a continuity of trying to play a sort of a useful interlocutor role, but this relationship will continue to be very difficult going forward. And again, Germany's ability to also forge a common European position here will be really key. And that's where I think we'll have to, again, look for whether Scholz will continue to play that role as kind of a unifier, bringing countries together in the way that Merkel has on many issues in the past.
Okay. Yes.
Can I just quickly add my perspective as from someone from Istanbul as well? I think one thing that's not going to change is the type of, the leverage Erdogan has over Germany and over Europe on the refugee issue. And I think there's a really strong sense, again, in Germany and the rest of the Europe that, this issue needs to be dealt kind of outside of the EU. And I think kind of paying of third countries, aid to neighbors of Afghanistan, but also related to Syria as well, and keep on sending money to Turkey to deal with the refugee issue. I think that type of transactional relationship will continue, which will mean that Erdogan will continue to have that leverage over the EU.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And then there's a question actually I have about immigration. We had the 2015 immigration crisis in Germany. And given the continuing instability in North Africa and now potential waves of Afghan refugees after the US withdrawal in that country, do you think it's possible there could be a second crisis, similar immigration crisis, and how would Germany handle it, or the new likely coalition, how would they handle it now, and differently, or what lessons have they learned from the previous immigration crisis? And I leave that open to who would like to answer here.
I mean, I guess just to continue on my point, I think, there will be it looks like there's going to be a humanitarian crisis and a refugee problem, but I don't think it's going to be felt the same way as the EU felt it in 2015. So there's a sense that, the Balkan route is sealed. There's a lot of backing behind kind of Greece to be quite strong on the borders. So I think the strategy has changed to dealing with the issue kind of away from Europe. And if that means kind of more monetary help to Turkey or other countries, I think that's the way EU wants to deal with it.
Okay.
I would just add that Europe will probably have a new and more serious immigration crisis, but probably coming out of Africa over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, you're looking at 15 million people who live day to day on Lake Chad, which is drying up, will be dried up completely within 10 years. And those people will have to move. And this is where you see the intersection of climate change, drought, and migration pressures. And certainly in Spain, you see that reflected in the rise of a right party. And in the French election campaign already, the rhetoric from candidates like Michel Barnier, who wants to freeze immigration, and Eric Zemmour, an extreme right-wing candidate who is now surpassing Marine Le Pen in the polls, shows that immigration coming from the South is going to be a major issue. And of course, in Italy, that's been a big factor. So I would say watch the immigration crisis on the southern border more than I think, let's say, the influx of Afghan refugees into Germany.
What I would just add, I think, is that Merkel, to her credit, has managed to deal with the immigration issues without creating the kind of political domestic issues that Bill mentioned we're seeing in other countries across Europe. I mean, AfD only got what, now 10, 11% in this election. I mean, if we looked at coming out of the migration crisis, 2015, 2016, they were on the rise. Of course, they are stronger maybe in some parts of Eastern Germany and among some parts of the population than others. But nevertheless, she has managed to suppress populism at a time when we're seeing populism in other European countries, and with the potential added pressures of increased migration, and that will create continued problems. And she has managed to keep Germany together at this, very challenging time. And I think that's really to her credit as a leader and as a unifier of the country.
Yeah, to underscore what Erik just said, by all accounts, the million-plus Syrian refugees who poured into Germany have been extremely well integrated. At least 40 to 50% are now fully employed, are contributing to the economy, and this is sort of a quiet success story that a lot of people have not noticed, but it's really significant.
Thank you. There's also a question about climate change. We know during the German elections, it was a big issue of importance. And I'm just wondering, especially with the Greens potentially joining a coalition government, what do you foresee as far as Germany's push or advocacy on climate issues within the EU and beyond? If I can start maybe with you, Erik.
Sure. I mean, just a couple of issues that I think will come up. One will be, I think Germany, the challenge that Germany is facing, one of the challenges is reducing its own emissions. Germany has actually increased its own emissions in part because, it basically got rid of nuclear power and it's heavily reliant on coal power, and that will likely continue to be the case as it's facing this energy crisis. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge, I think, for the next government. Will not just be climate policy, but really the sort of decarbonization and the investments needed in shifting to a green economy. And that's, I think, is something where, there's a huge opportunity, but that really requires investments, and it really requires the kind of foresight that maybe, as we've been discussing, Germany has kind of lacked over the past decade, of kind of stagnating in terms of its reform agenda. So I see this as being potentially one of the big priorities of Scholz, if he ends up being chancellor, of course, alongside the Greens, is really kind of coming up with a sort of Build Back Better program for Germany. And a lot of the focus will be domestic renewal and transition towards a decarbonized green economy. But the type of investments and leadership that will require will be quite substantial.
All right, thank you.
If I could just add, I think reducing the coal production in Germany is absolutely important. I mean, because as Erik pointed out, the emissions have been going up, and the Greens are appalled by this. The other question, Emmanuel Macron just announced a major new program of mini nuclear reactors, which are supposed to be much safer. And this will be a accord for Greens in general, whether they will accept the view of some environmentalists who have concluded the only way the world can solve the emissions problem is coming to an acceptance of safer nuclear power. And I don't know whether they'll ever be able to make that jump, because the Greens are so dogmatic in their opposition to nuclear power. But if ever we can come to a resolution on how to deal with nuclear waste, maybe with these smaller mini nuclear reactors, that will be a big breakthrough in fighting the challenges of climate change.
Thank you. And now this is a question, I think, for you, Bill. Merkel and Germany are key to the initiative to bring the Western Balkans closer towards the EU and speed up the accession process. How might that change with the new leadership?
Well, I think the European Union recently punted on that issue, saying, well, we'll consider membership in the distant future. And it's a source of great frustration for the countries in the Western Balkans. But I think that with all the other priorities that the new government will be facing, particularly in coming to terms with a path on the future integration of Europe with Emmanuel Macron, I think the integration of the Western Balkans is likely to be very low on that list of priorities.
Erik, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Bill is spot on, but I think it also underscores, the values-driven dimension in principle, supporting European integration. But at the same time, I think in Germany and maybe in other parts of the EU, there's a sense that by bringing in too many countries that are not fully prepared, that can actually undermine rule of law and sort of the state of democracy within the EU. And I think that notion is probably something that we could also maybe see reflected in the new German government, also given, as we've been discussing with Naz, the sort of the democratic deterioration within the EU in countries like Hungary and Poland. So I think it's really about shoring up the European project rather than enlarging it at this point.
Okay. And there's a question really for all three of you, and it's what do you consider Merkel's greatest success for Germany, and what was her greatest miscalculation or mistake? And I'll start with you, Naz.
I mean, I guess you could frame all of these, a lot of the successes as somewhat as weaknesses as well. But I would say, you know, for a long time, Germany has been a broker, a really good one, but there's a sense that a shift needs to take place now if Germany and the EU want to and are keen to kind of consolidate and project more power, that they need to kind of go beyond just being a broker and actually become a driver, an engine. And I, you know, we'll have to see whether Scholz is capable of this shift. You know, that would entail a lot of the things we talked about already, you know, complementing Macron's ambitions on EU strategic autonomy, you know, committing to deeper fiscal integration at the EU level, committing to tech industrial policy. You know, these were things that, in a way, kind of under Merkel, that Germany hasn't kind of made enough, I guess, progress. But also on areas like, again, Europeanizing some of the issues. So a lot of it, a lot of the kind of China, Russia policy, Turkey policy, Poland, Hungary were kind of very tactical. So moving them to a more strategic, long-term Europeanized approach, I think would kind of strengthen EU's position on that front. So these were kind of successes in terms of Merkel's ability to manage difficult problems, but at the same time, they kind of lacked vision to move Europe and Germany to the next level.
Thank you. And Bill, same question.
Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, I think one of her more underrated successes is the integration of the Syrian refugees, 1 million plus, into the German economy, which is a great achievement. And it was largely due to her persistence in following through on this once she opened the doors to those immigrants in 2015. And I would say her biggest shortcoming, failure, was the pursuit of economic nationalist policies that undermined Macron and other efforts to develop a more integrated European Union. Notably, the deal on Greece, I thought, was rather shameful, because while it's dressed up as saying, well, she found a way to broker an agreement, it was really all done to bail out German banks. And so the debt that was borne by the German banks was simply transferred to the Greek government as sovereign debt, and I think that was I think a rather shameful development that she pushed through.
Thank you. And Erik?
Sure. I think actually one of her big achievements or things that she deserves a lot of credit for is her handling of the Crimea crisis in 2014. She actually brought the European countries together. She led with imposing sanctions on Russia. That was a big deal for Germany to do that historically, and given all the links and business interest, for her to do so, I think took real leadership actually, and she actually delivered and has worked very actively on this issue ever since. So I think on Crimea and Ukraine, she does deserve a lot of credit. But I do think at the same time, on the other side of the coin, her biggest weakness, at least when it comes to dealing with Russia, has been Nord Stream 2. I mean, continuing to push a pipeline that is almost universally disliked in Central Eastern Europe, and that has caused tremendous tensions with the United States. and not really, she could have looked for, if she wanted to, a way to kind of get out of this, but she has not really shown leadership. She has allowed this project to go forward. And I just think that's very unfortunate, because it will make Europe and Germany more reliant on Russia at a time when Russia is flexing its muscles and acting, aggressively towards the European Union and towards NATO.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Erik, Naz, and Bill, for a fantastic discussion. And we all look forward to seeing how this coalition will play out and the policies to come. Thank you so much again. And Courtney, to you now.
Yes, just to echo, thank you, Joanna, for moderating. Thank you, Naz, Erik, Bill. It was a real pleasure to have you. And I think that the timing of this was great. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. Our next briefing is actually on Thursday, so we're staying in Europe. We're just talking about Russia. So it's at 12 p.m. Please do RSVP. Feel free to invite friends and colleagues who might be interested as well. It should be a really good discussion. So again, thank you to everyone who joined today, and particularly to our wonderful panelists. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.